Hello again, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Real Wealth Solutions podcast. As usual, I'm joined by my awesome co-host, Greg Scully. My name is Darren Light. Today, our guest is Brandon Thornberry with Urban Gate Capital. Brandon is a friend of ours and now current partner that we are excited to be in a deal with in multifamily. We met him 2-ish years ago, maybe at a dinner in Nashville. I think I'm correct on how we got acquainted. And if you wouldn't mind, just take a minute, tell us a little bit more about who Brandon is, what you're into investment-wise, how you got to where you are. Just a little intro, please, sir.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, guys. Super flattered to be asked to join you here, and also super stoked to be in a deal with you guys. You know, so
Likewise.
We've been talking about it for a while, and we closed last week, right?
Yeah.
July 6th, right? So it's been about a week, and rocking and rolling on that deal. A little bit about myself. I live in Nashville, Tennessee with my wife, Katie, 3 kids, Margaret, Hank, and Ava. They are 4, 6, and 9. So we're in the thick of it with the kiddos, loving that. And I came here to Nashville to study music business at Belmont University. And out of school, I worked in the music industry as a tour manager for bands and artists. And I loved that. We did about 125 shows a year. So traveled all over the US, overseas, throughout Canada. So I've been to every state except Hawaii so far. And that was just a fun job. I loved it. But I always knew that I didn't want to be a tour manager when I was 60. So I started buying real estate as sort of an exit plan. And so I bought my first single family house in Nashville in 2005. And I did what Bigger Pockets now calls a house hack. So I had 3 roommates, they paid my mortgage, and lived there for free. And I caught the real estate bug there doing that, and just started buying rentals slowly after that to eventually quit my job as a tour manager. And so when our first child was born, 2012, I came off the road and went full-time into real estate. So that's kind of a little backstory on how I got started.
So like 7 years to full time then.
Yep.
Sort of.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So
everything's in Nashville? Or Tennessee at least.
Yeah. So Middle Tennessee. I started out in Nashville area buying single family duplexes. And this is jumping ahead a little bit, but 2 years ago, I started buying multifamily. Small to mid-sized apartment complexes in Middle Tennessee. So markets like Chattanooga, Murfreesboro, Clarksville, Tullahoma. So right now I'm focusing mostly on Chattanooga, Clarksville, and then anywhere within an hour of Nashville.
Okay. Columbia. I think you forgot Columbia on that.
Yeah, right. Columbia. Sorry. That's an important one. Absolutely. As of last week. Yep.
So go ahead, Darren.
In 2005, you bought that first one. You knew it was the beginning of an exit plan.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a number in mind, monthly income to hit before you quit that full-time job? Or in 2012, when obviously your child was born, you're like, you know what? Here it is what it is at this moment. And now I'm going to have to go out there and grind to get it to really where was that? What really happened?
It was kind of both. I mean, there was definitely sort of a freedom number I was trying to get to. Luckily, you know, as a tour manager, I was kind of making like a teacher's salary. So it wasn't a massive number that I had to hit. So I probably could have quit earlier, but really having our first child was really the thing that kind of, it was like, hey, I can't be away, every weekend from my my daughter. So that kind of just made me finally take the jump, even though I probably could have done that earlier if I needed to.
Because your single family experience is not only buy and hold, correct, but a significant amount of flipping.
Yeah. I've never really considered myself like a full-time flipper. I've probably flipped about 100 houses, but I've kind of seen that more as like a side hustle. So I've done a good amount of flipping, both renovation flips, and then also I've done a lot of wholesale flips. You're probably familiar with wholesaling and maybe even wholetailing. So I did a little bit of wholesaling early on, but eventually started getting to more wholetailing where I'd actually take ownership of the property, maybe clean it up, and then sell it to another investor. So
yeah, I was going to say we should probably define wholetailing a little bit, because I don't think a lot of people may be familiar with that.
So wholesaling is, you get something under contract and then you sell that contract, but you never really take ownership. And so wholetailing, or sometimes people call it prehabbing, is, you're actually taking ownership of this property, and then you're maybe teeing it up for another investor to really take it and do the renovation. So I've owned houses for like as little as like an hour, just to actually take ownership, do a double close. And then other times I've owned properties 20 or 30 days, and then I'm selling it over to another investor.
How would you recognize the opportunity between doing a straight wholesale versus a wholetail? I'm just wondering if some of it was just accidental, or if some of it was, that looks like a pretty good deal, I think I'm going to wholetail it. And if it was, a early decision, or just multiple exit plans that run parallel.
Yeah, I got kind of worn out early on, and I think this has changed a little bit, but it just people kind of maybe beating you up on how much you were going to make on your assignment fee, or just kind of like the weirdness of having that on a HUD. So it just was cleaner for me just to take ownership and have more control over, I could hang out longer and just wait for that right offer, rather than just sort of having to align everything for this, perfect wholesale setup. Now there's people that are killing it wholesaling that just, they just do that day in and day out, but that just wasn't for me. So I enjoyed the wholetailing or prehabbing a lot more.
Why don't we do that, Darren? That sounds.
No, actually, it's a really
discussion for another time.
No, I just had this discussion.
I'd love to chat more about it.
I just had this discussion with another partner, and I've never done one, but you've already taken possession, ownership on paper. Hey, let's just clean the junk out, spruce up the landscaping, throw a coat of paint inside, leave everything intact, even though it's dated, and then make 30 grand on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
As opposed to trying to hit 60 or 70K on it,
That's right. And really the challenge is, with wholetailing, and I've made this mistake many times, it's really kind of a give a mouse a cookie kind of thing, because you're like, hey, I'm going to go in and I'm going to paint. And then you're like, well, if I'm going to paint, I should probably change the light fixtures. And if I'm going to do that, and it starts, evolving. So I've had to really, if I'm going to wholesale something, just be very like strict on like, I'm only going to do this, like I'm not going to, and also I found, if I've tried to do a very light reno on something and take it more to a retail buyer, I've run into challenges there, because you get those inspection reports back and there's just so much. So I've just tried to stay to one end or the other. I've not had very good luck on just, very few times has that worked out very well, where I've just come in and done a very small amount and then tried to sell it to a retail buyer.
So, okay. Yeah, that answered my question. So even on wholesaling, you're still just selling it to another investor who's going to finish the flip, if you will.
typically.
Not
Yep.
retail market. Yeah.
Yeah, it
Okay.
was nice, but I mean, I see that working. Very experienced flippers can see through pretty much everything for the opportunity, but the wholetailing kind of clears the path for other people that might have a little more trouble visualizing the upside when there's literally vines all over the front of the house and it's full of old furniture and whatever. If you can just,
Yep.
seems like if you can get rid of some of that physical clutter, it'll clean up some of the mental clutter for people looking for an opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I started doing that because since buy and hold is really my focus and flipping is more of like a side hustle, I just found that I was spending so much time, even if I had a GC or a project manager on a flip, I was still just spending so much mental attention on a renovation flip that I just had to say, okay, I'm not gonna do that anymore because it's just taking up too much of my attention. So
return on effort.
Really kind of why I switched over to, if I'm gonna do a flip, it's really got to be very low time commitment for me. So that's why I started doing that.
What made you eventually 2 years ago look at multifamily? What in your mind?
Yeah, that's
a
really good question. I think I would have eventually ended up there, but the Nashville market really forced me to look at multifamily. The reason is, I was going along doing, another Bigger Pockets phrase is the BRRRR method. So the BRRRR is, you buy, you renovate, you rent it, and then you refi it. And so I was buying houses in Nashville for 60 to 80,000, and I was putting 20 to 30 into them, and then they were refining. They were appraising for 150 to 200, so it's refining out. And that was going well. I probably would have just kept on doing that, but then Nashville became really the it city, and Nashville went from being a cash flow city to an appreciation city. And so I was having a really hard time finding those same types of cash flow deals. So I thought, well, I'm just going to go to another market and just repeat this. And so I'd go to Chattanooga or Memphis or Louisville, and I'd look at single family, and I'd always come back feeling kind of worn out, and I couldn't really put my finger on it. It's probably pretty obvious at this point, but just the thought of going to Chattanooga and finding 50, 60, or 100 houses, buying them, renovating them, renting and refining them, it just felt daunting. So I eventually realized, hey, if I'm going to go to another market to look for cash flow, I want to do it on a much more scalable level. And so that's really, Nashville kind of just forced me to start looking at multifamily. So I probably would have ended up there eventually, but it just came out of necessity. I wanted to be able to go to Chattanooga and just look at 1 or 2 or 3 apartment complexes rather than drive around and look at 100 houses. So that's kind of how I ended up there.
Yeah, I'm like sticking with Nashville for a little bit. You had quite a bit of experience there. So, at what point did you feel like you had somewhat of a market advantage? And what I mean by that is I really like knowing our markets very well.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just be like, I know exactly where that is. Oh, I remember analyzing that 2 years ago. And, it just helps you make decisions so much quicker. Did the market advantage maybe you gained with the flips, knowing what a good opportunity would be much faster than somebody trying to do from out of state, which I think ended up being pretty common. You ended up competing with people bringing in money from other places, and how much of that carried over to the multifamily side? Because the same kind of rules apply. A good school district is a good school district, whether it's next to a house or an apartment complex.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I think has carried over into multifamily is 50% figuring out how to renovate something on a tight budget and still make it look great. So I love one of the things I love the most is that I get to do is really envision the CapEx on a property, and then figure out, how can we do this to where it looks like we've spent $10K a unit, but we've really only spent 5 or 6. And so I think doing that in the single family space and learning the ropes there, early on my first dozen or so houses, I did all the renovations myself, refinishing the floors, painting, swapping out toilets, fixtures, all of that. And so I probably should have exited that earlier, but it did allow me to figure out, okay, how can we do this, on the cheap? And then when I was starting to sub it out, knowing what the value is for different projects. So I think that has carried through into multifamily.
Yeah, you have firsthand experience of not only what things actually cost, but what the labor associated with whatever material you're putting down or installing. You know what goes on to do that. And the advantage of multifamily is that you can take that knowledge and throw it into a template because
just rinse and repeat.
Rinse and repeat across an apartment complex. You're really probably only looking at 2 or 3 floor plans, maybe with some slight variation, but every house is
every
pretty
house
different.
Every single family house, you're looking at it, you're analyzing, are we moving a wall? What are we doing in the kitchen? And so you're absolutely right. I mean, you get into a multifamily and you've just got your paint, your floor choice. I'm sorry, I don't know if you hear my garage door opening. My office is above our garage, so it's.
Oh, okay.
No, we didn't hear it.
Are you just flexing on us, saying that you have a garage? Is that what?
Right. This is my oasis out here, away from my house, so I get to work from home, but have a separate space. So it's a huge blessing. But yeah, you're right. I mean, you get your paint color and your flooring and your countertop, and you just rinse and repeat on your unit. So I love being able to do that.
300 units currently just in multifamily. You still have some singles laying around?
Yeah, so I'm down to about 30 single family.
You're down?
Down to about 30 single. Yep. I've sold off some. I'm continuing to do that. I've sold a few this year that I'm typically taking like 1 or 2 and then doing a 1031 into a complex. So I'm that's always a challenge, because the single family space is very time consuming. I am trying to have a little bit of a crystal ball on the single family. The majority of what I have left is very close to where Oracle just announced that they just paid $253 million for a spot where they're going to build their Nashville campus. So I am going to hang on to some of my single family that is within a 2-mile radius of that complex for maybe 2, 3, 4 more years, because I do foresee those values going up significantly. But some of my other single family that are just, a lot of hassle, or, there's just always something going wrong. Some of those I am selling off, going and taking that and going into multifamily and also commercial projects, which I'm very excited about as well.
Have you had some of those single families since 2005?
Yes. Yeah, I still have my first house.
Wow.
Yeah, I still have that. Yep.
You've seen some interesting things happen in Nashville
It's been
over
crazy.
the past decade and a half. I mean, speak to that a little bit. What did the housing crisis look like then? And then,
I mean, I really started going after it in probably 2007 was when I really started buying like my first rentals. I bought my first house in 2005, but that was the house hack, so I lived there. My first rental was really kind of at the start of the crash. So when I say that, people are like, "Oh, you must have taken a beating." And in some ways that was kind of the best time. I mean, that's when you were able to pick up houses in Nashville for $40 or $50 or $60,000. So, I mean, I never want to, be happy about people struggling in a recession, but that was really the time to pick up some pretty awesome deals. So, I didn't really feel, I never remember being in that time being stressed. Rents were great. People needed places to live. And so it was actually a pretty good time for rentals in Nashville.
Yeah, and you weren't buying retail anyway, so you
No.
weren't paying
Nope.
retail at the top of the market and then having your value go down,
Right.
40%.
Absolutely.
So even from a loss of value perspective, you're probably still on the right side of the waterline.
Absolutely.
And then, more recently, there's this pandemic thing, and Nashville actually was on the bad side of that from a lot of the
Yep.
rent, people not getting rents that they probably projected from, it's been almost 2 years, right?
How's it?
I don't know, a while.
Yeah.
I mean, in 2018,
Yeah.
if you were buying in Nashville, your pro forma said something dramatically different than maybe what happened in 2019. And I don't want to do too broad of a brush. A lot of that was in specific asset classes or Class A type stuff where they weren't able to get their rent projections. I mean, how did you weather that from your portfolio point of view, and then just in general being like in Nashville, why this was happening?
Yeah, I think you're right that the A-class apartment complexes got hit really hard. When COVID first hit, I was pretty stressed. I was preparing for 50% collections. I was looking at my portfolio and I was saying, okay, if I only get 50% rent, can I make it? And that's what I was preparing for. It did not go that way. I think probably about 95% collections was about where we ended up. And so I did have, some, as far as like my single family portfolio, I had, a handful of people that just said, hey, like I'm in a tough spot. I'd like to just move out and move back home. And on those, we just worked it out. I just said, hey, well, why don't I keep your security deposit and we'll just call it even. And they moved out and those places rented right back up, no problem. And then on the multifamily side, across my portfolio, I would say probably had about 5 or 6, maybe 7 units that really there were those tenants that really just dug their heels in. They did the CDC declaration. They said, hey, you can't touch me. And we had a hard time with 5, 6, maybe 7 units across, the portfolio. But for the most part, I was, pleasantly surprised that it ended up being okay, not too brutal.
Yeah, and at the same time, I mean, just from our point of view, we had a very similar experience in our Tennessee markets. Most of delinquency was held in a very small percentage of the rent roll and was kind of ongoing. But generally speaking,
what did you guys see along your portfolio as far as collections?
90+%.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fine. There was no rush to pay rent.
Sure.
So the fifth didn't really matter anymore to some extent. A lot of forgiveness of late fees. You just work with people, but
right. Did you guys waive late fees for a while?
For a while, sure. Yeah.
For a while.
Tried to work with people. But generally speaking, it was more stress than it was, on paper. As an event, it was more of a stress event than a paper event.
Yep.
For me,
absolutely. I totally agree.
Anything that you're taking out of that moving forward? I know for us, Darren, correct me if I'm wrong. We're kind of looking at maybe higher median income type areas in general, or, proximities to, we really like stuff around hospitals and a medical district, because when everything got shut down, those essential people were
Affected the most.
in terms of employment, were unaffected. They were certainly affected in other ways that I don't want to discount in any way, but they had less exposure to job loss, let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't really taken, I guess, the time to really think through how COVID, or if we have a repeat of it, what we would need to do to prepare ourselves for it. So, that's definitely something good to think on.
It's just interesting. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, workforce housing. It's bulletproof.
Yep.
Workforce housing. And then
Sure.
the pandemic hit, and Class A, I think, broadly speaking, held up better
Yep.
in terms of impact on collections and delinquency. So, it works till it doesn't work. Hey, it's Greg from Real Wealth Solutions. If you'd like to know more about our passive income opportunities, jump onto realwealth.solutions and hit that schedule a call button. We're always happy to talk about our multifamily and flip projects and to answer any questions you may have. Again, that's realwealth.solutions. We look forward to hearing from you. And now, back to the podcast. You've got a new thing going. Are we talking about this?
We can. Yeah, okay. Absolutely. So,
I saw Will had Urban Gate Capital on his LinkedIn profile, so I figured it's a little out of the bag. But explain it for us. It sounds like you're getting into the private lending space.
So this is kind of COVID related. So at the time that COVID hit, I was doing a good bit of wholesaling, flipping, and COVID hit, and I thought, I'm not going to be really meeting with people, chatting with them about their houses. So, maybe what could I do for active income, and so I just started doing a little bit of private lending, hard money lending, just as kind of a, hey, let's fill the gap. And the demand has just been, more than I could fund with my own capital. And so you guys know Will Coleman. He's a rock star real estate investor and comes out of the lending world. And so we've partnered up, and we are expanding the hard money lending to just do more volume than I can do on my own. So that kind of came out of just the necessity of not being able to meet with people as much. And one of the things I love about hard money lending is you can just really do it from wherever, so we can look at deals and underwrite them and fund them. And I don't have to necessarily be in Nashville, even though that's where primarily we are funding deals just for the start of our company.
Yeah. And then, that goes back to that market advantage we talked about briefly.
Yep.
Is that I think it's great. You took part of what you're already doing, realized there was an opportunity to leverage it from a slightly different angle. So you didn't have to go out and create an entirely new knowledge base to monetize. You took an existing knowledge base and figured out the infrastructure needed to apply private lending to it, which is the other stream of income that you figure out how to draw out of it, which is I imagine maybe you can speak to it a little bit from a business point of view. What does the business infrastructure look like? That is that an SEC type thing, or is that a since it's just interest income, you can go as detailed as you want as that, but that kind of side of it fascinates me, is like, how is that actually put together? Or is it just just a bunch of promissory notes?
Yeah, so for now, eventually we will get to a fund type status, but right now it is promissory notes with investors on every specific deal. So as we scale, we will need to move away from that and go to more of a fund type level. But right now we're using what's called a tilt license structure to fund deals in the Middle Tennessee market.
A tilt license?
Yeah, so it's a Tennessee industrial land and thrift license is what that is.
Okay.
And so that allows you to do commercial type lending. We don't lend on primary residence deals, so only on commercial properties.
And this is serving the flipping industry, basically.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So, and I think the big need is, in this competitive market, you have to be able to close quickly with cash to be competitive on deals. So we're seeing a lot of people that they maybe want to take down a vacant lot or a tear down, and they need to be able to move on it quickly. And so they might use our funding for a bridge loan. They might use us for 60 or 90 days, and then they would refinance into a construction loan with the bank. Or, just your typical 6-month loan that you might need for like a renovation flip type of project. So typically we're loaning anywhere from like 60 days to 6 months. Sometimes we are doing transactional funding to allow for that sort of double close deal that somebody doesn't want to assign it. They want to actually take ownership, then they want to sell it to somebody, but they want to do that inside of 1 day. So that, we'll fund for that 1 day as well. So it's typically either transactional funding, maybe like a 60-day loan, or maybe up to like a 6-month loan on the hard money lending.
Could you explain the transactional funding a little bit more? I'm not familiar with that at all. So
yeah, so the transactional funding is really interesting. If let's say you have somebody and you've gotten something under contract, maybe your assignment fee is rather large and you don't want your assignment fee to be on the HUD. So you might want to actually go ahead and take ownership and then just sell it that same day to somebody else. So there's an A seller, there's the B buyer, and then there's the C buyer. And so we're funding the A to B transaction, and then the C buyer is coming in and they're buying it from our borrower. And so, we're just funding it for the day. So our money's coming in and it's coming back to us that same day.
Oh, okay. Is that like a fee-based structure rather than an interest rate structure?
Correct. Yes.
My guess.
Since there's no time there, it's really just for the day. There's no interest, so it's just 1 point of the loan for the day.
So what's your recourse for a day?
So
for those, what's your recourse for those 8 hours or whatever?
Yeah. So what's interesting about the transactional funding is we actually have the title company. They don't release our funds to the A seller until the C buyer's funds come in. So that's one level of protection. We also have a deed of trust and note that are drawn up, but they're never recorded. So their signatures put on everything, and then whenever the transaction is finalized, that's just torn up. That's never recorded. Huh. So that's in place as like a default. We do have a deed of trust and a note, but that never really comes into play because we have that with the title company that they will not release our funds until the C buyer funds come into the closing table.
So that's interesting. So at some point you were like, hey, does anybody need some money? I'm just going to loan money.
Yeah.
and then
yeah,
it worked out and somebody said, hey, Brandon, you got any more money you want to
Yep.
put
and it
to
just
work?
kind of spiraled from that
That's
organically, you know, and so we haven't really done, you know, we're very early on in this, so we haven't really done any marketing. So it's all been very organic, just kind of word of mouth, just funding deals that way. So, but it's been fun. I mean, it's great to be able to just analyze a deal from your desk and underwrite it, and you know, it's get to be a part of that real estate transaction, but you can do it from wherever you want to work from.
Yeah, and from a return
Cool business.
perspective, you know, if you got some money lying around that you want to be fairly liquid, but backed by a real asset, and if you just have 2 or 3 deals going, your actual annualized return on that with some velocity of money can be
Absolutely
pretty good.
Yeah,
you know?
and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another nice, you know, if if I'm funding a deal myself, I really enjoy this space, because typically, you know, and things can go wrong, you know, it can not necessarily come back in the time frame that you originally planned, but sometimes I'm funding a deal for 30 or 60 days, and you know, as long as everything lines up, I can have that money back to me before I need to go buy my next apartment building. So I can be utilizing funds in between deals. And so that's another reason I like that space. And what we do is we built in fees if it goes past the initial term. And so if it's let's say it's a 60-day loan and we're doing 2 points and 12%, we built in a 1 point late fee for every 30 days. We do that because to do a loan modification is annoying, because we have to have the borrower get it notarized, we have to record it. So instead of doing a loan modification, we just built in a 1 point late fee for every 30-day period past the initial term. And so everybody knows that on the front end, there's no surprises. It also means we don't have to negotiate if a loan is going past the initial term. So even if it goes longer than was originally planned, it actually works in our favor, because what you were talking about is like the annualized return, you know. So if you're doing 2 points and 12% and you get to loan that out 6 times in a year, you're earning 24%. Now, a lot of things would have to line up perfectly for you to do that, but let's say you're loaning it out 4 times, you know, you're making 20% return on your money. So it is a really nice annualized return, you know, for funding, using your funds in between maybe some of these larger deals that you're doing.
And of course, the borrower knows what his all-in cost potentially is if he has to use some of that extra time.
Yep.
What is required to obtain a tilt license?
Yeah, so you have to have an entity, and then you just have to go through the process with the state.
So you're really just signing a bunch of papers?
Yep. But I mean, I think, you know, and if you ask 10 attorneys their opinions on hard money lending, you're gonna get 11 different opinions. But I would say if you were just, you know, looking to do this as a little side hustle with your own capital, I don't think I would go to the extent of getting a tilt license. You know, if you're just doing a handful of these. So that's
you're forward thinking a little bit into growth with the tilt. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool. That's all very interesting.
Yeah.
I wanted to kind of go back in time a little bit. You're a real estate, or were a real estate agent, or no? Did I just make that up?
I am a licensed real estate agent. I don't do much agent work. I have actually never listed a home for somebody else, and I've been an agent for 8 years. But I do have my real estate license.
Okay, because I'm an agent, and I have not listed anything either. And I'm curious, and quite honestly, I don't think I've gotten any great benefit yet. That is completely on me, that I'm not leveraging it more than I am right now. But you found that as an advantage for being in a wholesaling business? A lot of people talk about, yeah, well, maybe I'll get my real estate license and then I'll let myself into doors, which I still haven't done. And I'll get first look at the MLS, which is probably not as easy or as, everybody's thinking the same thing. So whoever's clicking refresh the fastest is getting the first look.
Yeah, I mean, it's been probably 7 years since I've bought something that's been listed on the MLS. So it's definitely something I think about on an annual basis on if it's worth having my license. I do think there's added liability if you're an agent too. I mean, you need to.
Oh, disclosures.
You have to disclose that you're an agent, when you're buying houses. If you're doing any sort of marketing, I think you're opening it up yourself to some things there, if things could go wrong that way. So it's definitely something I'm always evaluating if it's worth it. You do have sort of some nice access to things like CRS through, here in Middle Tennessee, we use RealTrax. So that's really helpful looking at deals. So I would say early on, it was really helpful just to learn the ropes, but it's become less necessary as I've gone along. And definitely not, a source of major income for me. So yeah, I would say if you're going to get into real estate and become an agent, I think you need to recognize expenses. You're going to have NAR dues, you're going to have E&O insurance, you're going to have to pay for RealTrax, you're going to have to pay your brokerage fees, you're going to have to do continuing education. So, early on, I did use my license and help other investors buy properties, and I would make some commissions that way, but I'm rarely doing that these days. So, and that's on purpose. So I would say just if you are thinking about getting your license, you just want to keep all those things in mind.
Yeah, and depending upon your jurisdiction, sometimes a real estate license is needed if you want to manage properties for
That's
other
true.
people.
Yep, for other people.
At least in Tennessee, if you have an ownership interest, you don't have to be licensed. But that was potentially another income stream that crossed my mind. It's like, well, if we're managing our own properties and so wants us to manage theirs, then there might be some income to be made there. So that hasn't panned out either. So
do you guys have interest in managing other properties?
No, I talked myself out of it. Yeah,
yeah, no. Me neither. No.
Well, that's it, because even going back a little bit from like your number to your full-time job, it sounds like it was a combination of passive income from your buy and hold stuff and transactional income.
Yes.
From wholesaling, wholetailing, that combined gave you the annualized income to live your dream, because this is a slow process from the cash flow game, either single families or multifamily. It takes a decent amount of units to get enough cash flow from rents alone to amount to, the average income for most people. I think that's why some people pursue the real estate license, because you would have some of that transactional income. But
yeah, and I think
well, I was just to say, in the realm of like houses that we flip at, you're buying them at 60, 70,000, the actual real dollars of income from those commissions need a lot of them.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. I do think, having my license did help me come off the road, because early on I was doing some realtor work. And so it did help to kind of bridge that gap as I was building up my buy and hold. So I think if somebody is looking to maybe quit their job, and go full-time in real estate, I think it could be helpful for the right person, but especially, the retail clients, which I have never done. I've only really helped people buy investment properties as an agent. It's just a lot of work. I mean, you have to really hustle So I just never felt like I could provide the value that somebody would need and the time somebody would need to help them buy their primary residence. So I don't know that I've ever helped somebody buy their primary residence as an agent.
Yeah, because then on the sell side, I don't care which direction the kitchen faces.
Right.
So I'm not that guy, So we would, when Darren and I were talking about, like, well, maybe we'll, get something on the front end and then just give it to our professional real estate brokers who are great at what they do. I'm like, that's not us. We don't have an interest in that.
Yeah, I know that's smart. Yeah, I mean, especially as you guys are scaling up, you don't have the bandwidth. So speaking of unit counts, where are you guys in the trajectory here?
I just did the calculation as we were coming on. We've transacted on just over this 34 unit we have under contract currently. We will have transacted just over 300 units, but that includes 3 full cycles. So we don't own part of those as well. So
you have any that multifamily that you've regretted that you sold thus far?
I would have preferred to hold a deal that we had in Chattanooga.
Me too.
We made money on it, so I'm not going to.
I know the one because you and I talked about that.
Yeah, I forgot we talked about that, Brandon. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because I mean,
it's fine. We made money, So
the decision-making powers that be were out of our control. So but we would have preferred. So anyway, that's the only one to date. Second one, definitely glad we sold it.
Nice.
And this next one will do really well.
That's great.
Have a pending sale also. And we'll go find another one, find a better one.
Yeah. Well, have you guys done a 1031 out of any of your complexes?
No. We have not. That has recently come up.
It's coming up more and more.
It's coming up more and more. And just realizing the difficulty of keeping an entity together in order to 1031. I mean, it can be done even if people want to live, if people want to leave the entity, there's solutions for that, for buying members out. But we're thinking about it more, I think, being more forward looking at that exit potential for entities set up in the beginning. So
smart.
Is it one of your top strategies, you would say, for purchasing?
Just like you guys, I'm starting, as I've 1031 out of things, I'm thinking more and more about that on the front end. So like if I'm going to do a JV deal with somebody, I'm setting up in a tick structure so that if we want to exit separately and each go our separate ways on 1031s, we can. I've like another land deal recently that I've owned for 5 years with a JV partner. It's a couple acres of land, also near where the Oracle's going, and we did a drop and swap. So we, of course, it's not really a drop and swap. We went into a tick structure out of our LLC, so that when we sell it, most likely this year or early next year, we can each 1031 out separately if we want to.
So you just do a tick by default, so that you do have the flexibility of, hey, it doesn't have to be this entire structure moving forward.
Yep, we can each of our LLCs. So like if each of you guys were the JV partners, Darren, you could have your LLC, and Greg, you could have your LLC, and you could go into it as a tick, and then you could go out separately when you guys sell, and each 1031, out into other deals. So definitely. Now, of course, with 1031 changes, or not really on the chopping block, but with the new administration, that could, affect things. But I think the talk is $500,000 limit, I believe. So I guess we'll just see where that lands.
Yeah, right. There may be changes, but how many people will it really affect? I don't know.
Yeah.
Remains to be seen. Well, let's change gears a little bit.
Sure.
Free recording. Was poking Brandon about that he doesn't have a website for Urban Gay Capital, which he actually does, and which is fine. And that's part of, I think, what this discussion will be, and in social media in general is, you've had pretty good success without having to rah out there on social media. I think you might admit to yourself that I think at this point you're feeling a little behind the game on online presence.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So, and I think I'm in your camp on this, is striking that balance between being active on networks and being productive on networks and being authentic on networks. So could you solve that problem for me?
Yeah, I've got
the next
solution
10 minutes.
That's a hard one. It's really tough because I have started to try to be more active on socials, just to put it out to the world so that I can try to be more top of mind. If there are other opportunities out there. So it's very self-serving. Yeah, it's definitely a tough balance to kind of put yourself out there and tell people what you're doing to hopefully attract business, and then at the same time not try to not be too bragging about your successes and coming across that way. So I found that it has been tough to just be sort of authentic there. So I'd like to, I think it would be fun to get better at being on socials, providing value to people, and so that would be, something that I would like to do more of, whether it's, hey, I'm renovating, this is how I renovated this unit. Here's how I did it for this much. I think that would be a fun way to put stuff out there that people would maybe appreciate.
So how did you do it without being on social media? I mean, actually, back in time, were you going to local RIA meetings? Were you, you brought up Bigger Pockets, which is kind of a hybrid thing because that's very, real estate centric, obviously. I mean, how did you make the connections? And it took a while. I mean, this didn't happen in 6 months.
Right.
I mean, you're more than a decade into this. So
yeah.
Was it just the grind or what?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I think you guys probably get asked, where are you finding deals, right?
I got asked that today.
How are you finding deals? And I wish I had a repeatable system. And unfortunately, especially in this market, I think it's very organic. It's all about relationships. And I think a lot of people are just looking for the, hey, do you have a marketing campaign and can I copy it? And especially in the multifamily space, I have not found that to be successful. I think it takes a while, just building relationships with people. So my deal flow has been very organic, I bought, just for example, I bought a deal in Clarksville last month from a friend of mine who's a very experienced multifamily investor, but he's getting more into triple net commercial deals. And he just, I think, kind of wanted to be done with this one complex. And that just happened to line up. And I don't think, there was really any system to really know about that deal other than just hanging out with people and talking. I think a few other things, you need to network with brokers. I think that's pretty basic, but very important. I think a few other thoughts come to mind of just being a closer. being known that you actually close deals. I think once you're on the board in multifamily, like Michael Blanc talks about the law of the first deal, and I think that's so true. Like once you get that first multifamily deal done, you're kind of in this weird little club of multifamily owners, and I think brokers start reaching out to you because they've seen you close on a deal, and they know that you can make it happen. So I think that's a big deal. I think not being a retrader, so some people talk about, hey, like I'm just going to get a deal under contract. I can always go back and retrade. I think that'll get you blacklisted pretty quickly. So, trying to come in at pretty close to where you're going to end up and only asking for reductions on deals if there's something of a surprise that comes up is really important as far as deal flow. And then I think also just being like really, easy to work with. You're not being like a pushover, but just brokers want to, I think, work with people that they enjoy talking with. So I think that's critical as well. So just kind of all of that, as well as just networking, being at events, just chatting with people. That's really the only way that I've found to really build up deal flow. Do you guys have any, other, big deal flow tips? I would love to.
I mean, the deal we just worked on together was a fully marketed deal. So there were no secrets there. It was just blasted to everybody.
Yep.
We weren't special in any way, shape, or form on that.
Yeah, but I think we got that deal primarily because of the broker relationship, right?
Yeah, because we all had a separate relationship with that broker.
It's true. I think, it's a tough position to be in with no track record.
Absolutely.
I mean, that everybody faces that. And so, if you're able to find somebody to work with that has a track record, then you can leverage them. Hopefully you're doing it by more than just tagging them in a post.
Sure.
Actually providing some kind of value to the team.
One other
go ahead, Darren.
thing to add to the list. One other thing to add to the list that Brandon said is probably, and he said this, I'm sorry, but you want to make sure you are communicating back to the broker as much as possible and as quickly as possible, because
absolutely
people reach out to them every day and ask questions, or he asks them questions, and then they just don't sometimes never get back to them. So frustrating on there, and I'm sure.
Yeah.
I think that's another fundamental.
I think along those lines too is like, I'm kind of a deal junkie, so I like to just look at as many deals as possible. So I might have been guilty early on of introducing myself to a broker and just saying like, hey, just send me like anything, like just send me all your deals. And I think that a lot of people say that sort of thing because they don't want to miss out. But I think when you're calling and introducing yourself to a broker, you need to tell them what you're looking for. And the reason is you want to be top of mind with a broker when they come up on a deal that, if they come up on a heavy value add deal, I want them to immediately think this is a Brandon deal. Like I want to be top of mind. And when they see a 40 unit in Columbia that needs a lot of work, I want them to think of me first. And so I think calling brokers, I try to stay away from like a cap rate that I'm looking for, because I'm more concerned about where we can take the property to rather than the entry cap. So I try to stay away from that, but I try to tell brokers like, hey, I'm looking for a value add deal. I want, a refi opportunity within a couple of years, so some meat on the bone, and just try to be as specific as possible about maybe deal size and what you're looking for, so you're not just lost in the flood of people calling them.
And just some measure of consistency, I think helps. If you're just show up every now and then and be like, I'm still here, I'm still engaging with you, I'm not going to harp you. You can't go in and out with
Right.
like with no communication at all,
That's right.
and expect to be, because there's plenty of people that just have call Jim, the broker, every 3 weeks on their calendar. And it may be something as simple as a text, even just like, hey, Jim, just wonder, you got anything, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. And I think I think it's important to network with other multifamily owners. And, whether that's just going to multifamily events, or maybe, I have done a little bit of cold calling to other multifamily owners, but it doesn't look like the single family space where you're just calling them up and saying, hey, do you have anything you want to sell? It's more of an approach of like, hey, let's swap war stories. Like, what are you seeing in the market? Just building that relationship. I'm never really bringing up the, hey, do you want to sell your property? If I am, it's very late after several calls, and so if you're at multifamily events and you're just networking with other multifamily owners, it's following up, grabbing lunch with them, building those relationships so that, maybe something will fall out from that.
A quick tip that may seem obvious, and maybe you already practiced this, but someone else shared it with me. When you make that phone call to that other multifamily owner, you can also prospectively use them as a resource for your hard money lending business as well. Just throwing it out there.
Absolutely. I love that. Very cool.
Yeah, I would just add, like, if you are investing in the market you live in, do the in-person stuff, find the local meetup. I think that is probably can give you an advantage, because it's so much easier to stay top of mind when you run into each other every first Tuesday of the month at the Olive Garden or wherever the hell's going on.
Yep.
So, and that's just a consistency thing too, is, you're consistently in that room, they'll assume you're doing something at some point, even if you're not. So,
yeah. And I don't know if this was your experience, but I think that first deal is the hardest. And so for me, it took me, a year to buy my first multifamily. And so, typically if I'm hanging out with somebody and they're trying to get into multifamily, I say that as a word of encouragement, not to discourage people. Like, you feel like you're beating your head against the wall. This multifamily space is a much harder mental game than the single family space. And so, I don't know, was that your experience too, where the first deal was maybe the hardest to get into, or not so much?
Yeah, it was, because I was flying all over the damn place into different markets and stuff. So
it was a year for me. It was actually a year for Greg and I personally after we met, but I think he was looking longer than that, maybe a year and a half to 2 years. So, and for me, it occurred in my backyard within 2 hours. So
that's awesome.
It was a little bit easier from that perspective.
Yeah, and it was easier from my perspective because it happened in your backyard, because I was still in Alaska. So that was a comfort level thing for me that I think other people can maybe, because I went to Tucson, I went to Spokane, I went to Dayton. I'm like, this is hard to try and invest from out of state without having some kind of infrastructure of partners in the market. So working with Darren solved that key component, and mentally just made it a lot easier. I was like, oh, somebody's there that can drive to it and knows the market, and I'm not completely winging it from the knowledge base on myself and just reading reports and stuff.
You didn't want to buy an apartment building in Alaska?
No,
Are there apartment buildings in Alaska?
Yeah, they're made out of snow, and they have to rebuild them every winter. It was just from a fundamental market analysis, Anchorage, Alaska isn't that good in my opinion. And we'll just keep Alaska,
Sure.
not go back there to work in any capacity. So
I've been to Alaska once, and it was phenomenal. So
was that what? Can you tell us who you went to Alaska with for a band?
yeah, so I worked with contemporary Christian artists, and the band that I worked with for 7 years is called Big Daddy Weave.
Yes.
You've heard of them?
No.
They used to, as they were getting big, they used to visit Pathways Church in Sevierville a lot because
We did a lot of shows in Sevierville. Yeah.
one of their singers and or drummer had a relative there, and that's how they would always show up at our church. So, yep.
Awesome. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So traveled on a tour bus for 7-8 years, and it was like summer camp on wheels.
That's
it was a good
awesome.
time.
Huh,
Yeah,
that would be
loved it.
interesting. That's cool. What a
Yeah.
great opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, it was neat.
All right,
Yeah.
let's wrap it up. What do you say, Brandon? You want to tell us how we can get a hold of you? We'll throw everything in the show notes as well. But if you got anything you're willing to put out verbally, now's the time.
Best way to get a hold of me is just email me, urbangatecapital@gmail.com. And yeah, would love to connect with anybody. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to chat.
Thanks
Oh,
for coming
absolutely.
on.
No, yeah. I think people really benefit from hearing. How did that unfold?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a crazy ride.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, thank you everybody for joining us on the Real Wealth Solutions podcast. In our show notes now, if you would be interested in seeing what we're up to, we put a link to our newsletter sign up. So we'd appreciate you signing up for that. And as always, 5-star review is expected or requested, or whatever you're willing to do for us. We also appreciate. If you know somebody that might benefit from hearing Brandon's story, please share this episode with them directly as well. So until next time, for Darren, for Brandon, thank you all very much. We'll see you
everybody
on the next
Thanks, guys.
episode. See ya.